prices climb more than 1% in early Asian trading on Thursday as supply concerns grow with the escalating conflict in West Asia. China announces defense budget of $275 billion. That's about $25 billion more than last year, but sets an economic growth target of 4.5% to 5% for 2026, its lowest in decades. Russia offers to divert oil supplies to India as West Asia conflict disrupts crude shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Air India to resume Jeddah flights from March 5th as West Asia conflict continues to disrupt air travel. And disruptions at stake even for big tech. Nvidia shuts Dubai office while Amazon and Alphabet move to secure employees as West Asia conflict disrupts flight and regional operations. And staying with big tech, Apple unveils a $599 MacBook Neo to target budget buyers and compete with Chromebooks and early entry-level Windows laptops. Those are the headlines, but we continue to bring you all the latest coverage of the war in West Asia. Let's begin first with the White House. The White House says the U.S. is stepping up military, diplomatic and intelligence efforts as the Iran conflict escalates. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said on Wednesday the Departments of Defense and Energy are coordinating closely on plans to secure the Strait of Hormuz and ensure safe passage for oil tankers through the critical energy corridor.
The timeline for making the Strait of Hormuz safe for oil tankers to transport their oil through the strait, what is that timeline and what can the president do to speed up that timeline?
I don't want to commit to a timeline, but certainly it's something that is being calculated actively by both the Department of War and the Department of Energy. They're working very closely. Both secretaries are in all of the briefings on this subject with the president, and this is, again, something they're monitoring. And if and when necessary, the United States Navy will provide assistance to escort oil tankers through the strait.
And Karoline Leavitt also said Spain has agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military a day after President Donald Trump threatened to cut trade with Madrid over its critical stance on the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Listen in.
With respect to Spain, I think they heard the president's message yesterday loud and clear, and it's my understanding over the past several hours they've agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military, and so I know that the U.S. military is coordinating with their counterparts in Spain, but the president expects all of our European allies, of course, to cooperate in this long sought-after mission, not just for the United States, but also for Europe, to crush the rogue Iranian regime that, again, not only threatens America, but also threatens our European allies as well.
Meanwhile, reacting to reports of late Supreme Leader Khamenei's son becoming Iran's possible successor, White House said President Trump and his advisors are discussing what role the United States might play in Tehran once the conflict ends.
Iran's regime, its leadership has largely been decimated. Do we have a sense right now of who is actually calling the shots in Iran? And we're also hearing reports that the Supreme Leader's son may be named his successor. Do you have any more information about that? I just had a quick follow-up as well.
Sure. We've seen those reports as well, of course, and this is something that our intelligence agencies are closely monitoring and looking at. The truth is, we'll have to wait and see. The president has said repeatedly that the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are the 4 military objectives that I laid out for you previously: to destroy Iran's navy, to destroy their ballistic missile capacity, to ensure their proxies in the region can no longer harm Americans, and to also ensure that they can never obtain a nuclear weapon. As for what comes next for Iran, the president has said, of course, it's a good thing for the United States to want freedom for the Iranian people, and ultimately we hope that freedom rests in their hands.
All right, so that's the latest from the U.S. as far as the conflict in West Asia goes. But yesterday again proved to be a decisive day. The Iran conflict widened to the Indian Ocean after the U.S. submarine strike It sank an Iranian warship near Sri Lanka yesterday. That's Wednesday. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says an American submarine sank the Iranian naval vessel off Sri Lanka's southern coast. Sri Lankan officials identified the ship as the frigate Iris Dena, which was reportedly returning to Iran from an eastern Indian port. Now, dozens of sailors are believed to have been killed in the strike. The incident marks a dramatic escalation extending Washington's campaign against Iran's navy beyond the Gulf. Take a look.
This is the moment a US submarine sunk an Iranian warship off the southern coast of Sri Lanka, according to the United States Department of Defense on Wednesday. Sri Lankan authorities say they've recovered dozens of bodies and rescued more than 30 people. The exact date the video was filmed and the type of warship could not be immediately verified. But the deck shape and the mast of the vessel seen in the footage matches file imagery of the same type of warship as Iris Dena. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed the incident, which dramatically widens Washington's pursuit of the Iranian Navy.
In fact, yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II.
Sri Lankan Foreign Minister Vijayatha Herath said the Navy received a distress call from the ship just after 5 a.m. and launched a search and rescue operation. He added that 180 people were on board the ship. Sri Lanka has identified the ship as the Iris Dena. It was listed as taking part in a naval drill held in the Bay of Bengal from February 18 to 25, according to the exercise's website.
US President Donald Trump said American forces are now in a very strong position in Iran, describing the campaign as tremendous. Iran and has the capacity to sustain the fight for as long as necessary. Speaking at the Pentagon, Hegseth said American and allied air defenses remain strong and that US forces have ample resources to continue the operation.
We are only 4 days into this, and the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead this. Only us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it. Or at least, soon enough, they will know it. America is winning. Decisively, devastatingly, and without mercy.
And U.S. Senate Republicans have backed President Trump's military campaign against Iran. The Republican-led Senate vowed to block a bipartisan resolution that sought to halt the U.S. air war against Iran. Lawmakers voted 53-47 against advancing measures, largely along party lines.
Why is Donald Trump hell-bent on making history repeat itself? Why is he plunging America headfirst into a war that Americans do not want and which he cannot even explain? Enough is enough. The American people deserve a say, and that is what our resolution is about. We must act to stop Trump's belligerence.
45 of the last 47 presidents, which is all we've had, have ordered kinetic acts, just like President Trump has done, without going to Congress. This isn't new. This has happened 45 in the last 47 presidencies. The Constitution, Article 2, clearly gives the president not only the right, but indeed the duty, as does his oath, to protect the United States.
And the conflict in Iran may be widening further with a NATO member now directly involved. Turkey said NATO air defenses intercepted and destroyed an Iranian ballistic missile that was headed towards Turkish airspace on Wednesday. The incident marks the first time a NATO member has been directly drawn into the escalating West Asian conflict. Take a look.
Video from Illis News Agency showed a crane lifting the debris of a NATO air defense missile out of the water in southern Turkey on Wednesday, after it intercepted a ballistic missile launched from Iran. Turkey said NATO air defenses destroyed the missile when it headed into Turkish airspace, marking the first time the NATO member has been drawn into the Middle East conflict. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan addressed the downed missile in a speech to military personnel.
Bu sabahki olayda olduğu gibi,
as in this morning's incident, we are taking all kinds of precautions in close consultation with our NATO allies, and we are making the necessary intervention immediately. We are giving warnings in the clearest way possible for similar incidents not to occur again.
uyarılarımızı en net biçimde yapıyoruz.
Turkey, which borders Iran, had sought to mediate U.S.-Iran talks before the air war that began over the weekend. It warned all parties to refrain from actions that would lead to further escalation, suggesting Turkey was not poised to call upon NATO for support. But Ankara could potentially invoke the alliance's Article 4 after the airspace breach, if it deemed the threat serious enough, a step that could lead to Article 5, which would oblige members to come to its defense. It was unclear where the missile was headed. A NATO spokesperson said it condemned Iran's targeting of Turkey, which has the bloc's second-largest military, and that it stood firmly with all allies.
Meanwhile, Iran is trying to reassure Gulf neighbors that its military actions are aimed only at the United States and Israel, not at neighboring Arab states. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has been speaking with regional leaders, including Qatar's Prime Minister, to stress that recent missile strikes targeted American interests and did not aim at Gulf countries. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has echoed that message, saying Tehran respects the sovereignty and friendly and neighboring countries. He added that Iran had tried to avoid war through diplomacy, but was forced to respond after joint US and Israeli military strikes. And with that, we will slip into a very short break. But coming up after the break, markets seem to be recovering from the lows of the last 5 days, and Sensex is up about 0.5 percentage point. All indices and all sectors pretty much seem to be in the green. Rohit Srivastava will be joining us after the break to give us a check on the stock market mood this morning.
इन्होंने हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस नहीं लिया और हॉस्पिटल्स के लाखों के बिल चुकाने में अपनी सारी सेविंग्स गवा दी। और इन्होंने पॉलिसी बाजार से हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस लिया, जेब से एक भी पैसा खर्च नहीं हुआ और पॉलिसी बाजार ने कैशलेस क्लेम दिलवाने में इनको पूरा सपोर्ट किया। तो रिस्क मत लो, पॉलिसी बाजार से 1 करोड़ का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 525 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया। बुझने लगे किसी की उमंग को, उसको तरंग दो, दुनिया को रंग दो।
Birla Opus Paints.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Let's bring you all the updates from the world of stock markets. Now, let's begin with the US. US stocks closed higher on Wednesday as easing geopolitical concerns boosted investor sentiment. The markets gained after reports that Iran had signaled openness to talks, raising hopes of a potential de-escalation in West Asia. Now, investor confidence was also supported by a pledge from US President Donald Trump to stabilize global oil markets, helping calm fears over energy supply disruptions. More in this report.
U.S. stocks closed higher on Wednesday, with the Dow gaining 0.5%, the S&P 500 climbing more than 0.75%, and the Nasdaq adding 1.3%. A news report that Iran had signaled openness to talks and a pledge by President Donald Trump to steady oil markets calmed investor anxiety about the Middle East clash. But Adam Coons, chief investment officer at Winthrop Capital Management, said strong earnings and economic data are what's really powering stocks.
Aside from some smaller, and I don't mean to downplay certain things that are obviously big globally, but from a market standpoint, from what affects revenue, earnings, and that sort of thing, there's really nothing major hitting. To the contrast, I think we're getting data that's showing that the U.S. economy especially is continuing to be really resilient, consumers resilient, jobs resilient. So I think that's going to continue to be the real story for markets.
Stocks on the move Wednesday included Moderna, which jumped 16% after the company agreed to pay up to $2.25 billion to settle a long-running legal fight over a COVID-19 vaccine patent. Shares of Broadcom, up more than 1% at the close, climbed further in extended trading after the chip designer forecast second quarter revenue above Wall Street estimates. And shares of identity security company Okta, down 1% at the close, recovered that loss as shares moved higher in extended trading. The stock gains came despite the company projecting single-digit growth for the first time since its 2017 IPO, as economic uncertainty weighs on enterprise technology spending. Okta's revenue for its previous fiscal quarter, however, rose 11%, beating analysts' estimates.
And taking cues from the U.S. markets, Asian markets are also in the green this morning. Let's pull up the charts and see how the Asian markets have been performing. In fact, the South Korean Kospi index is up more than 10% in trade this morning. Remember, this comes a day after the index had lost about 12% of its value. Meanwhile, all other Asian stocks are rejoicing on news of potential resumption of supply of oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Hang Seng is up about 1.5%. Japan's Nikkei 225 index is up almost 3% in trade, and so is the number coming from Taiwan's TAIEX, which is up almost 3%. The Shanghai Composite Index is also in the green, but lower in comparison to other Asian markets. So that's the update from Asia. But remember, yesterday was the defining phase for South Korean Kospi. We'll tell you about that in the next story, because South Korean stocks plunged 12% on Wednesday, marking the biggest single-day fall in the market's 46-year history. The sharp sell-off had wiped out nearly $500 billion in market value this week, as investors worried that the escalating war involving Iran could severely impact its economy. The turmoil has also pushed the South Korean won to a 17-year low as of yesterday, while rising global oil prices had triggered panic buying on fuel across the country. Take a look.
Cars lined up at a petrol station in Seoul on Wednesday as South Koreans filled up their tanks amid rising global oil prices triggered by the war in Iran. South Korean shares sank 12% on Wednesday, posting their biggest drop in its 46-year history. It's wiped $500 billion in value just this week, and comes as fears the Iran war could cripple Asia's fourth largest economy sent the won to a 17-year low. Losses in South Korea's stocks far outweighed those seen elsewhere in Asia. The country is heavily reliant on Middle Eastern oil for its energy needs. South Korea is the world's fourth largest buyer of oil, and around 70% of its purchases come from the Middle East. Korean equities had been Asia's best performing, having doubled over the past year. But traders say that makes them particularly vulnerable to a capitulation. On the index, circuit breakers were activated for the first time since 2024, halting trading for 20 minutes. The losses marked an abrupt turn for a market that had rapidly outperformed global peers on an AI-driven rally.
All right, and while we've seen Asian markets really climb higher this morning, the mood in India, while in the green, is still a little more somber as compared to its Asian peers. In fact, Indian benchmark indices Sensex and Nifty are up less than about 0.5 percentage point each in early trade. Remember, this is data in just the first 5 minutes of trading. Sensex well below that psychological 80,000 level, and Nifty 50 also below the 24,600 mark. Meanwhile, the small cap and the mid cap space performing better than the broad markets, but volatility in the Indian markets is extremely high. In fact, it's more than 19, when remember the average level of about 12 is what the Indian investors have become accustomed to. So massive swings in the red and the green have pushed up India VIX by about 9% or so. Let's move on now to the Nifty 50 heat map and try and see which are the sectors which are adding to the gain this morning. And of course, we will come to the energy stocks in just a bit. But beyond that, there is some recovery in the IT pack as well. In fact, TCS had opened stronger before falling into the red again this morning. TCS, HCL Tech, both in the red in the first 5 minutes of trading, while Infosys holding and taking cues from the US markets, especially the tech sector stocks, up by about almost flat. In fact, now Wipro up about 0.33 percentage point each. Meanwhile, Reliance Industry is up almost 2% or so. The energy stocks are definitely having a good day, a good bull run in the markets today. This coming after news of the US helping to resume operations in the Strait of Hormuz. So pretty much the entire energy pack led by Reliance Industries, but even ONGC, Coal India, BPCL, HPCL and IOCL both, all these stocks in the green this morning. Some recovery, and what we are seeing potentially on the broader markets is a reflection of the energy market performing well. Let's put this into perspective with Rohit Srivastava, founder and market strategist, IndiaChart.com, who joins us this morning. Rohit, good morning. At least some green shoots in the markets, and this coming after we saw 5 days of absolute bloodbath on the markets worldwide, including in India. But energy pretty much seeming to lead the way this morning. Where does the story pan out for the rest of the trading day today and for the next few days?
So it's interesting because, the last couple of times when I was sounding slightly negative, it was more based on the economic, data points.
Yeah.
And what we've ended up is with a situation which is war. And I'll just highlight to you, you were talking about the India VIX some time back. And we do try to judge where the market is based on the VIX.
Okay.
And we've had at least 4 to 5 occasions in the last, 1.5 years where we've crossed the 20 level. And we've recovered from each of those. So the first one was in August of 24, which was the yen carry trade Adani fiasco coming back into light.
That's right.
And that didn't last very long. And then we had the tariffs in April of 2025 last year.
Right.
And that also we saw us recover from there. The VIX had actually gone to around 22, 23. And then there was the India-Pakistan war, when also the India VIX reached 22. So yesterday we've actually gone to almost 21.3.
Yeah.
Which is getting us very, very close to the territory from where markets have often recovered. Now, the catch here is that, yes, the bet has to be that we've priced in the worst of the war and it's not going to get worse than what it already is. And if that is true, then there's probably not more downside, at least on this particular news flow. And that is where there may be some short-term recovery in markets in the near term. So we should not be now we shouldn't be too bearish on the situation till we can really confirm that things are going out of control. Otherwise, we might have discounted it and things might only normalize from here. What we'll have to then judge is, whether this becomes a prolonged phase.
Yeah.
1, and 2, whether we again go back to start looking at economic data and trying to discount that. So those are going to be 2 separate things. But in the near term, the oversold condition should give us some bounce back in the Nifty from, the lows of almost 24,400 that we touched. Maybe retesting 25,000 to start with is what I'm thinking about. So that's still 400-500 points higher than where we are right now. That should be an initial move. I think 25,000 is where we gapped down from when the news broke out over the weekend. And that is the level that we would want to really get past to overcome the negativity altogether.
Absolutely. So that's still about 400 points or so to go. Meanwhile, you talked about the potential of this being a prolonged war, and in fact, a lot of anticipation around the length of the conflict in West Asia. Now, let's presume for a moment that it does end up becoming a prolonged war, and in that scenario, is there going to be an impact on India's fundamentals? And there are key questions that investors are grappling with. First up, can India's oil reserves hold up during the supply disruptions, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, even though we are hearing from the US that it may try to secure the Strait of Hormuz and aid the supply of fuel tankers. Then, of course, we've also seen, Rohit, the LNG disruption, especially coming from Qatar, and that is likely to mar domestic production. Add to that, of course, if oil prices continue to be high, the rupee continues to depreciate, will India import war-linked inflation? And that is something which could again cast a shadow on India's own growth projections. And then, of course, expectations, rupee depreciating. Should the Reserve Bank of India intervene already or wait it out and see how long this war is likely to be? And finally, of course, there are also fears, Rohit, on exports, especially the MSME exports to Europe and US, as shipping routes continue to be disrupted and insurance continues to be a lingering issue for ships. So overall, given all that we are seeing in West Asia, if this happens to be a prolonged war, then is India's own domestic fundamental story also at the risk of being threatened?
So it's not just India, right? If you have a prolonged war and if it escalates, if tried to touch parts of Middle East, then it ends up affecting, many other parts of the world as well. Europe is a major oil and gas importer for their energy needs and, cooling during winter periods, and many other reasons that we can think of why the world economy itself would slow down if this escalates further. Now, there are two parts to it. One is escalation and one is, as we said, a prolonged war, which is that it takes time.
Right.
Now, if you can contain it within the region and it is prolonged, just like what happened between Russia and Ukraine, it's still ongoing. The rest of the world moved on. So which situation are we going to face? Are we going to face a situation where the world just moves on? Are we going to face a situation where the whole world gets involved in this? The second one is, of course, worse than the first. The first one you can sort of discount because it's like if you have something which is temporary, even though there may be a near-term impact on growth, if you can say that 3 months down the line, all that will normalize, then markets would stop falling at that point of time because you would not, sell everything just because something is, going to be taking time, but eventually going to get resolved. So you'll have to discount it based on what really happens, whether you can say that the economic slowdown is temporary or it's going to be, more time consuming.
All right, fair enough. But what should investors really do at this point? And I'm specifically talking about retail investors, because over the last 5 days, today being an exception, but over the last 5 days, Nifty 50 had plunged about 4.5% or so. Sensex was down by more than 3,500 points in the last 5 days. Overall, we saw that the IT stocks, despite the turmoil, had performed better than the benchmark. So what should be the strategy for retail investors right now? Buy the dips, buy the bottom, or just continue with your SIPs, continue by accumulating quality stocks and wait it out and wait for the levels that you spoke about, the immediate sort of resistance at about 25,000 points for the Nifty and maybe above 80,000 for the Sensex. Should they just wait it out, or should they continue aggressively buying quality stocks when prices are low?
Between Jan and Feb, one of the strategies that I was putting out was, to either create some level of cash and so that you can buy it when the next opportunity shows up. And the second one is, if you are not able to sell your portfolio, because a lot of long-term investors prefer to just hold on, or as you're saying, continue to invest, then probably look at buying hedges. Not everybody is comfortable again here because buying hedges means you buy some kind of puts, and we were recommending the December 2026 puts actively to our clients. Now, what do you do in the current situation? Because the market's already fallen. What I would say is wait for it to bounce back, because you're getting some sense of normalcy that, okay, this is not going to escalate but may take time. So that is the first sense, which is why you're seeing a lot of recovery in both US and Asian markets on the idea that, okay, maybe things will stabilize. Now, if we get that kind of a bounce back, I mentioned maybe back to 25,000, or if you're lucky, a little above that, then that would probably be another opportune time to, build those hedges and leave them there. Because I don't think any of us are smart enough to predict how this war moves on a day-to-day basis? Do you get other geopolitical angles to it, involvement from other countries? We don't know that at this point of time. The ideal way would be that when it bounces back and maybe the VIX cools down a little bit, you are able to buy those hedges again. That would make it easier for you to sleep over a investment portfolio than to liquidate in panic. So I think look at this bounce as an opportunity to, de-risk or create hedges so that you don't worry about it too much. And that will then allow, and then wait for an opportunity to invest for sure. I think we would want to see much more clarity on the war front before we start investing, new money. Now, if you have existing SIPs, as you're saying, the purpose of SIPs is designed to buy dips and buy the decline. So it's hard to persuade people to, end those, though I know a lot of people do end up panicking and cutting off their SIPs. But I think a better strategy is really to create cash and hedge and keep and wait for an opportune moment.
All right. I am also looking at IT stocks. Again, they have slipped into the red this morning. We saw they opened much stronger and taking cues, of course, from the US big tech stocks, which were up in trade yesterday. But again, we are seeing massive profit booking in the IT stocks. Has this got anything to do with war, with the US dollar, with the US economy, or are we still seeing the AI fears play out on India's IT stocks?
So again, India's IT sector may look slightly oversold on short-term indicators, so there is a case for a bounce. But if I take a slightly longer-term view, that would not change. That they are going through a period of extremely slow earnings growth. The valuations were high because they were being treated as a defensive sector. What the AI trade has really done is it's taking off that valuation premium that the sector was getting. And once that valuation premium is significantly cut, you can't be at 20 times earnings for earnings growing at 5 to 6%. So once you cut that in half, then at that point of time, the sector may show attractiveness again. Now, even if you look at global software stocks, they've not really moved up a lot yesterday. There's some bounce back, but it's limited. So I guess you can get a near-term bounce, but it's not yet an investment. It's not yet time to be investing in IT stocks with a long-term perspective.
All right. Don't invest in IT stocks from a long-term perspective just as yet. Before I let you go, Rohit, I also want to pick your brains on something which came from the US yesterday, where we heard, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that, and this was to an interview to CNBC, that tariffs of 15% are going to be back on the table within a week or so. Now, remember, last when we were speaking about tariffs, we had come down to 10% after the US Supreme Court had struck down US President Donald Trump's tariff regime. But now that 10% likely to go up to 15%. Is that something that, markets have and market players have already priced in?
I would think so. I mean, moment they made that announcement, within 2 days, we were aware that they're going to go back to 15. And it's also possible that they can inch up towards the original 18, which was there through maybe other measures. So we should expect the deal to remain the same. I think Donald Trump himself has also reiterated that he wants everyone to stick to the trade deals that he's done with them, and so I don't think anything really changes on that front. And it's definitely discounted with when the deals were announced at the start of February.
Let's leave it at that for this morning. As always, pleasure having you here with us on News9, and thank you so much for your time. And moving on now, Qatar has halted liquefied natural gas production after its facilities came under attack amid the escalating conflict in West Asia, disrupting supplies to India and squeezing gas availability for key domestic sectors. Now, India relies on long-term LNG contracts with Qatar for nearly 40% of its imports, and the disruption has already forced supply cuts of up to 40% for several industrial users and city gas distribution companies. Now, the crisis has been compounded by the near shutdown of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial energy corridor through which a large share of global oil and LNG shipments pass. Now, India's largest LNG importer, Petronet LNG, said it has been unable to send tankers to Qatar and has invoked force majeure, citing security risks to maritime navigation. Now, Qatar Energy has also declared force majeure after drone attacks targeted facilities at Ras Laffan, the world's largest LNG export hub. Now, city gas companies warn that if the situation persists, costlier gas could erode the price advantage of CNG, likely pushing consumers towards electric vehicles or alternate fuels. Now, meanwhile, Indian energy companies are exploring the spot market to bridge the supply gap, even as policymakers monitor the situation amid concerns over higher costs for industries, fertilizer production and household gas supplies. Meanwhile, Russia has offered to divert oil supplies to India to help offset disruption caused by the ongoing West Asia conflict. According to reports, around 9.5 million barrels of Russian crude are already on vessels near Indian waters and could arrive within weeks, providing quick relief to Indian refiners facing supply uncertainty. Now, India remains vulnerable to supply shocks, with crude reserves covering only about 25 days of demand, while inventories of key fuels such as diesel, petrol and LPG also being limited. Now, the crisis has intensified after shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy routes, was severely disrupted following Iranian attacks on vessels after US and Israeli strikes on Iran. Remember, India had reduced Russian crude imports earlier this year amid trade discussions with the United States. But Moscow's share of India's oil basket has climbed back to around 30% in the month of February. Refiners are now in close contact with traders selling Russian crude, although any significant increase in purchases will depend on guidance from the Indian government. And staying with the ongoing conflict in West Asia, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long pushed for decisive action against Iran's leadership, and the latest US-Israeli strikes appear to have delivered on that ambition. But as the conflict expands, analysts say Netanyahu's close alignment with President Donald Trump could face strain if the war drags on or if Washington shifts its objectives. Take a look.
As the United States and Israel's war in Iran threatens to drag on, the possibility of differing goals and pressures at home are raising a major question. Can the two countries' tight alignment survive this test?
Help has arrived.
Toppling Iran's leadership has been Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's career-long ambition. After Donald Trump returned to office in 2025, Netanyahu repeatedly tried to turn the US president's attention away from Israel's war in Gaza and toward Iran's ballistic missiles and nuclear ambitions, a US official told Reuters. The two countries have been planning their military operation for months, an Israeli official said, even as Trump sent envoys to nuclear talks with Iran. And timing for the attack was decided weeks ago. Netanyahu told Fox News, quote, "I have tried to persuade successive American administrations to take firm action, and President Trump did." Though Trump rejected the suggestion that Israel might have forced his country into war.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand.
At the outset of the bombing campaign at the end of March, both Netanyahu and Trump said regime change was the goal.
To the great proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
But 2 days after Israeli airstrikes killed Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and much of his leadership, the Trump White House appeared to change its tune. Here's Defense Chief Pete Hegseth.
This is not a so-called regime change war.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
The objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Netanyahu, by contrast, has continued to call on Iran's citizens to take to the streets and overthrow their rulers. Trump has said the operation could take 4 or 5 weeks, or whatever it takes.
Whatever the time is, it's okay.
But pressures at home could affect the president's decisions as the war drags on and potentially expands. The operation is unpopular in the United States. Only 1 in 4 Americans say they back US strikes on Iran, according to Reuters Ipsos polling. And as the war hits shipping and energy production, rising gas prices could worsen the affordability crisis for them. Adding to the pressure, midterm elections in November could see the control of Congress change hands. Security expert Jonathan Panikoff of the Atlantic Council said political support could be derailed if U.S. casualty figures go up and Iran's leadership shows no sign of collapse.
Then I think very quickly you're going to see the American people question what we're doing here, and especially Republicans and independents say, this isn't what President Trump promised.
It's a map of an arc of terror.
As for Israel's longest-serving leader, Netanyahu's war on Iran is supported by most Israelis. It gives him a chance to seal its legacy ahead of challenging elections due this year. His far-right coalition faces fissures. He's on trial for corruption, he denies, and Israelis are still reeling from a multi-front war that began after October 7, 2023. That's when Iran-backed Hamas militants launched their deadly surprise attack on Israel, which has hit the Prime Minister's security credentials. Netanyahu has rejected responsibility for security failures that day, but many Israelis continue to protest against him regularly, demanding accountability.
Meanwhile, Russia has sharply condemned the U.S. campaign against Iran as cynical and inhumane. Moscow has accused Washington of fabricating a threat from Iran to justify its military campaign. Russia, which has a strategic partnership treaty with Tehran, also condemned the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei during the first day of the U.S.-Israeli strikes. Listen in.
There is no doubt that the so-called Iranian threat, which has been repeatedly described for many years, was merely a pretext for carrying out a long-planned scheme to forcibly overthrow the constitutional, I stress, government of a sovereign state, deemed undesirable by Washington and Tel Aviv, a state that is, I repeat, a member of the United Nations, and the renewed negotiating process served as a cover operation.
And on to now stories affecting travelers and their flight schedules, especially around India. Around 180 flights from three major metro airports, Mumbai, Delhi and Bengaluru, were cancelled again on Wednesday due to airspace restrictions linked to the ongoing conflict in West Asia. Mumbai airport recorded the highest disruption with 93 cancellations, including 48 departures and 45 arrivals. Delhi airport saw 52 flights cancelled, while 34 flights were called off at Bengaluru airport, including 18 arrivals. Flight operations have been impacted since Feb 28th after airspace curbs were imposed amid the escalating conflict involving the US, Israel and Iran. Meanwhile, Mumbai airport handled 8 repatriation flights on Wednesday to help bring back stranded passengers. These included 2 SpiceJet flights from Fujairah, 1 Air India flight from Dubai, 3 Emirates flights from Dubai and 1 flight each by Gulf Air and Royal Jordanian and Dammam and Amman. Now, according to the Civil Aviation Ministry, the crisis has already led to the cancellation of over 1,200 flights by Indian carriers and nearly 400 flights by foreign airlines as of March 3rd. Meanwhile, Air India has announced a resumption of its services to the West Asia, even as tensions in the region continue to disrupt global aviation. The airline said it plans to restart scheduled operations between Jeddah and India from the 5th of March. As part of the resumption, Air India will operate 2 flights from Jeddah to Mumbai and 1 flight to Delhi. The airline has also begun operating select flights to and from Dubai and Jeddah to help bring back stranded passengers, prioritizing their safety and well-being. In addition, Air India plans to operate a special high-capacity Boeing 777 flight on the Mumbai-Dubai-Delhi route to evacuate more passengers affected by the disruptions. At the same time, the airline is deploying additional international flights to manage rising travel demand. Air India will operate 3 extra flights between Delhi and Toronto from March 5th to March 11th, along with 3 additional flights to Frankfurt and 1 to Paris Charles de Gaulle between March 7th and March 10th. Now, these services are expected to offer better connectivity for travelers through the airline's Delhi hub. Meanwhile, Air India Express said its services to Muscat will continue with additional flights between Muscat and Delhi and Mumbai. The airline is also operating special flights from Ras Al Khaimah, connecting Delhi, Kochi and Mumbai until March 7th. Air India has also offered passengers the option of complimentary rescheduling or full refunds for bookings made on or before February 28th for travel to the West Asia. the UK and Europe until March 10th. Meanwhile, Akasa Air has also resumed some operations after a safety review. The airline will operate 5 flights connecting Abu Dhabi and Jeddah with Mumbai and Ahmedabad, while services to Doha, Kuwait and Riyadh remain suspended at least until March 5th. Remember, flight operations across the region have been heavily disrupted since Feb 28th, when escalating tensions in West Asia led to widespread airspace restrictions. And time for a very short break. When we come back, we'll tell you why China is upping its military budget. That and more on the other side. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
पढ़ता है खेलता है झूलता उछलता है दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया रिश्तों को रंग दो दुनिया को रंग दो
Birla Opus Paints. Volkswagen.
Welcome back. You're watching News9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Now, major global tech companies, including Nvidia, Amazon and Alphabet, are scrambling to ensure the safety of their employees across the West Asia following the recent US-Israel strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory attacks across the Gulf. The escalating conflict had disrupted civilian life across the region, affecting internet access in Iran, aviation routes and global energy shipments. Now, chipmaker Nvidia has temporarily closed its Dubai office, asking employees to work remotely. In a memo to staff, CEO Jensen Huang said the company's crisis management team has been working around the clock to support affected employees and their families. Now, Nvidia has deep ties with Israel after acquiring networking firm Mellanox Technologies in a $7.13 billion deal in 2019, making Israel the company's largest research and development hub outside the United States. Now, around 6,000 Nvidia employees are based in Israel. Meanwhile, disruptions to air travel have left dozens of Google's employees stranded in Dubai after attending a sales conference hosted by Alphabet's cloud division. Now, many employees managed to leave the region, but some remain stuck due to widespread flight cancellations. According to aviation analytics firm Cirium, more than 11,000 flights in West Asia have been cancelled since the weekend strikes. And US President Donald Trump met leaders of major technology companies on Wednesday to formalize a new pledge aimed at protecting consumers from rising electricity costs linked to the rapid growth of AI data centers. Now, under the Ratepayer Protection Pledge, tech firms including Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Oracle, OpenAI and xAI will commit to securing their own power supplies for data centers. Now, this move aims to ensure that the rapid expansion of energy-intensive AI infrastructure does not push up electricity bills for households and small businesses in the US. The initiative also requires companies to build or procure additional power capacity, easing pressure on the US power grid as demand from AI continues to surge. Listening to US President Donald Trump.
Under this new agreement, big tech companies are committing to fully cover the cost of increased electricity production required for AI data centers, and that would be prices for American communities will not go up, but in many cases will actually come down and very substantially. Because, you know, the data centers, and you people are so big, you're the biggest in the world, but They've developed a little bit of a bad public. They need some PR help, because people think that if a data center goes in, their electricity prices are going to go up, and that's not happening. It's not going to happen. And for the areas where it did happen, it won't happen anymore.
And moving on to China now. China unveiled its next push in the global technology race as Beijing's annual 2 sessions political meetings took place on Thursday. The gathering of the country's parliament and top advisory body announced hike in its defense budget to $275 billion. That's about $25 billion more than last year's budget, as it ramped up the modernization of armed forces to catch up with the U.S. military. Now, China also announced the country's lowest annual growth target of 4.5% to 5% in decades, as the government outlined its plans to tackle sluggish consumption and a flagging property market in 2026. Now, these announcements have come just weeks before U.S. President Donald Trump's likely meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. And finally, back to U.S. tariffs. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed 15% global tariff is likely to take effect later this week. This according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Now, the new tariff would replace the current 10% rate that was imposed after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down earlier duties introduced by Trump last year. Now, in a 6-3 ruling on Feb 20th, the Supreme Court of the United States said Trump did not have the authority to bypass Congress and impose sweeping tariffs under emergency powers. Now, speaking to CNBC, Bessent said he expects U.S. tariff rates to return to their earlier levels within the next 5 months, after going back to 15% by the end of this week. The day after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump, many businesses were left with more questions than answers. Several major companies, including FedEx, Costco and L'Oreal, have already filed lawsuits seeking refunds for the tariffs they've already paid. While the ruling is seen as a victory for businesses on paper, smaller companies are still unsure whether they will actually receive refunds, and if so, how long before the process comes into effect. We leave you with that story.
Since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down President Donald Trump's tariffs, big corporations including FedEx, Costco, and L'Oreal have sued the government for refunds. And while the ruling is a win on paper for many, some small businesses are realizing that recouping a tariff refund won't be easy, if it happens at all.
The refund is important, but it's more important if it's done sooner, because it allows us to stabilize pricing in the market.
Lee Siegel is founder and managing partner of VCR for Kids, which makes fixtures and learning products like toy boxes and cubbies. He says that while a tariff refund would help, the timing matters.
Like many companies that have imported, we have a tremendous amount of inventory that's burdened with these tariffs. And if there is in fact going to be a refund sooner rather than later, it allows us to adjust the cost basis and ultimately reduce the cost in the market.
Roughly 97% of U.S. importers are small businesses, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And of the $175 billion in tariffs paid to the U.S. government, small businesses paid about $55 billion, according to researchers at the University of Pennsylvania's Penn-Wharton budget model. Small business advocates say the government has the infrastructure to refund tariffs easily, and has done so before. But in a press conference after the Supreme Court's ruling, Trump didn't make it clear when or if there would be any refunds.
We'll end up being in court for the next 5 years.
For now, Siegel said he's holding off on litigation, citing a lack of clarity on the court process and no guarantee of the outcome.
Pretty much any business can operate under any set of rules and terms. It's really the inconsistency and the chaotic approach and the instability that really makes it very, very difficult.
नितेश श्रीवास्तव जी सिर्फ 35 साल की उम्र में अचानक एक बीमारी से चले गए। उनकी टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस के पैसे बच्चों की पढ़ाई और घर खर्च में काम आ सकते हैं। पॉलिसी बाजार ने क्लेम के वक्त फैमिली का पूरा साथ दिया। पॉलिसी बाजार पे 2 करोड़ का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 700 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया।
It's confirmed. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been eliminated. But it was just not about Khamenei. It was also about the entire regime which the Americans wanted to take out.
Are the Iranians going to carry out their pledges, and are they going to continue with their attack?
Though Trump had said that the waves of attack would continue, but a new signal has come that there might be a small pause.
IRGC is likely to adopt lesser radical and more pragmatic approach to basically buy time so that the regime can survive.
There is much more than what is visible or to the naked eye.
Khamenei was killed because uranium enrichment and the Iranian desire to make a bomb.
That expertise is there. People know how to enrich it. There are infrastructure which can again be rebuilt.
Iran today is headless. There is transition, but conclusion is far away.
इस खेल में खेला होगा, हर नहले पे दहला होगा, बड़ा है स्टेज बड़ा है, पूरा भारत साथ खड़ा है, साथ खड़ा है, गेम बड़ा है, dribble like a rap, pass 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 pass, setting up the trap, kick it hard in the ball, chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News9, English news as it should be.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm Nancy Bora and you're watching News9. Headlines first. Environmental concerns arise as tanker hit by explosion off Kuwait, causing oil spill as West Asia conflict intensifies. America's heavy crude prices surge to multi-year highs as the Iran conflict disrupts West Asia oil exports, driving global supply tightens and pushing benchmarks sharply up. China hikes its defense budget to about $275 billion, boosting military modernization as it seeks to narrow the gap with the US armed forces. IRGC announces deployment of new sea, claiming it achieves all objectives and successfully hits targets, claims Israel can no longer intercept its attacks.